You're listening to the Elvis Ultimate Fan Channel podcast, the channel that is devoted 100% to the life and career of the biggest selling recording artist of all time, with your host, Steve Francis.
Hello and welcome to this episode from Elvis the Ultimate Fan Channel podcast. My guest today is London-based journalist and Elvis author Zoey Goto. Alongside her best-selling book, Elvis Style, From Zoot Suits to Jumpsuits, Zoey's articles about Elvis have been published in GQ, Esquire, Numero, New Musical Express, and the New Zealand Herald newspaper, to name just a few. Zoey joins me on the line now. Hi Zoey, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I love the podcast.
You're based in London, is that correct?
That's right. I'm in central London, yes.
And I suppose the weather is just beautiful at the moment.
It's glorious sunshine for once, I'm pleased to report. It's very nice.
Are you out in your back garden talking to me?
No, unfortunately, I'm in central London, so it's very rare to have a garden here.
Right.
I have a lovely window with views over London.
Oh, very nice, very nice. Well, I can report, the weather report in Ireland is grey and overcast, so if you could send some of the weather over, I'd be very, very happy about that.
I will do my best.
Okay, so as I mentioned in my intro, you've written a book called Elvis Style, From Zoot Suits to Jumpsuits. But
yes.
If you can tell me just a little bit, so first of all, about your background in journalism and then how you came to do the book on Elvis.
Yeah, absolutely. So I worked for 10 years in the fashion and design industry. And then for the past 10 years, I've been a freelance journalist, writing about style, predominantly menswear. And how did the book come about? We'll have to go back to when I was a university student and I was working as a waitress in a restaurant. And I was having some downtime. I was flicking through a magazine and I came across an article on Elvis, and it was like being hit by lightning. It was a really memorable moment. I just thought, wow, he is the most incredible looking person I have ever seen. And that was the moment, really. I was absolutely hooked. So shortly after that, within a matter of weeks, I had booked tickets out to Memphis, and I ended up writing my university dissertation on Graceland. And then fast forward 10 years, and I was working as a journalist, and I was in a bookstore, and I was looking at the style books, and I could see everyone was there, all the greats. They had Audrey Hepburn, they had Marilyn Monroe, and I was looking there, and I couldn't see Elvis. And I thought, aha, someone's missing the trick here, given Elvis's huge influence on fashion. So I started to look around and realised that nobody had really covered it in depth from a fashion perspective. And that's where the idea of Elvis Style was born.
Well, I mean, a lot of people would agree with you what you're saying. He was the most stunningly handsome man that ever walked the earth. But he also had style with a capital S, didn't he?
He did. And I feel that in contemporary culture, it's his, massive influence that he's had and the massive input that he's had on fashion and design. I think it's been sorely overlooked, really. I'm constantly walking down the street and kind of thinking in my head, he looks a bit Elvis rockabilly. She looks a bit. I can see all these references.
Yes.
Or because I write a lot about fashion, I go to the fashion shows and I'm often sat there and, these guys are parading down the catwalk and I'm thinking, that is so Elvis. But unfortunately, it's kind of, he's not credited with the massive influence that he's had. And that was something that I really wanted to set out to do with my book, kind of give him the credit I feel he deserves.
Yeah, so the research for the book, if you can just sort of cover, did you go to Lansky's in Memphis while you were there?
Yeah, absolutely. I did quite a few trips to Memphis. I love Memphis. It is one of my favourite places on earth.
Me too.
And got to know Hal Lansky, who is Bernard, who was Elvis's tailor in the 50s, 60s and 70s. Hal Lansky is Bernard's son, and he is carrying on the Lansky legacy, and he's got a couple of stores in Memphis, and he was really helpful with my research, with interviews. He wrote the introduction for my book as well, so he was great. My research also took me over to Denmark to, I don't know if you know it, Memphis Mansion.
Oh, yes, yes. Is it Randers or something, isn't it, I think?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It was. I think it was actually initially called Graceland Randers, but they had to then change the name. So it's now Memphis Mansion, which is a museum that was set up by an Elvis superfan called Henrik, and he has a collection of over 6,000 Elvis items. A lot of the stuff is original worn Elvis garments. So we went over there. I packed up the kids and we went over there for a holiday, because those are the kind of holidays I take my family on. And then there were just many, many hours spent in the British Library, reading up not only on Elvis's life, but also on the fashion and design from the 60s, 70s, the 50s, 60s and 70s. And then a lot of time was also spent researching and reaching out to experts who I wanted to comment on Elvis and his style. And I found that Elvis, when I was reaching out to these people, I found that Elvis was a topic that really opens doors. I feel that if someone gets Elvis, they really get Elvis and they really want to be involved. And that was actually really lovely. So I heard back from lots of kind of high profile people that I wasn't sure if they'd get back to me, but they got back and they were really enthusiastic because, you know, Elvis had kind of sparked a real interest in them and they had lots to say about him. So I had a really nice response from people that I was reaching out to for comments about Elvis.
Good. I just want to mention a few things from the book. Just mention the agreement that Elvis had with the Lansky brothers when he first started out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is the first example of celebrity endorsement. This is kind of 70 years prior to, you know, these Instagram influencers who are posting about their latest product placement. Elvis was actually somebody who was really pioneering a celebrity endorsement deal. So he worked with Lansky Brothers, the tailors on Beale Street at the time. And this is when he was just starting out. So he was just starting to get booked for gigs, but he didn't have a wardrobe that was kind of worthy of the fans' adoration yet. So he struck up a deal with Lansky Brothers where they would give him free clothing. And in return, he was going around and he was saying to people, hey, I get my clothes at Lansky Brothers on Beale Street. So he was a kind of unofficial spokesperson, Hal describes it as. And I think this deal worked really well because Elvis became a lifelong customer for them. And Lansky Brothers had still got a thriving business where they're selling Elvis-related garments.
Yeah, so again, he was a first in that area as well. I mean, Elvis did very many firsts, but you're saying now that he was one of the first influencers. So that's another thing to add to his bow, a string to add to his bow.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so.
A picture I found very interesting in the book actually was the white buck shoes that appear in a lot of Al Wertheimer's photographs taken in the spring and summer of 1956. And I actually didn't know this. I mean, people often say to me, Steve, you know a lot about Elvis, but unless I knew this and I forgot it. But one of the shoes was actually, the right shoe was actually half a size bigger, wasn't it?
Yes, and I took a photo of those pictures when I was in Memphis Mansion in Denmark. They've got them in their collection. And yeah, apparently at the time he had a ingrown toenail and one of his shoes was half a size bigger. So I thought that was a kind of quirky little detail that I could add in there. But then I quite like in the book, it's on the page opposite, that really lovely picture that you mentioned of Elvis, where he's riding the train back from New York back to Memphis. Really beautiful black and white picture, and he's wearing those shoes. So I thought it was really nice in the book to try and link up the garments, but also show Elvis wearing them, to have that kind of relationship between the two.
Yeah, that's a superb picture. He's leaning his hand on his forehead, sort of framing his one eye, and the light is coming in through the window of the train. It's a brilliant picture actually. Actually, Al took a lot of great pictures of Elvis over such a short period. And I often say it was just before the curtain came down. There was never ever that much access to Elvis ever again.
Absolutely. I mean, so much access that he's there in the bathroom, photographing him in front of the mirror. I really love that also that Elvis allowed that kind of closeness as well. I think it shows his kind of generous spirit.
And of course, those beautiful pictures taken of him and Barbara Hearn on the afternoon of July the 4th at Audubon Drive.
Absolutely.
As you probably know, I actually spoke to Barbara last week, and what a charming lady she was. Very graceful, beautiful lady.
I listened to the podcast, and I thought she was amazing. You could hear what a kind soul she was in the interview.
I was absolutely made up when she agreed to talk to me, and she actually said to me at the end of the interview, you probably heard that she won't be giving any more interviews, so I was very honoured to think I would be the last person to get an interview from her.
I think that's so lovely that you had the opportunity to talk Elvis with her.
I wanted to mention Elvis's appearance on September the 9th in 1956 on the Ed Sullivan Show, the tweed jacket and bison check and black peg pants. Again, that was something that would be quite unusual to be seen somebody wearing on a television show. They would normally wear a tuxedo or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a quote I found from Bernard where he described feeling just really shocked when he saw Elvis come on stage. And he said, "I thought, man, this boy is dynamite." And there were 60 million people watching Elvis that night. And I think most of the people watching that would have had a kind of mixture of shock and admiration when they saw him came on stage, because nobody had really looked like him. Nobody had sounded like him. Nobody had moved like him before on screen in that way. So I think at the time it was probably quite shocking, really, to see somebody who looked like Elvis.
I think another area where would be quite what's the word, trailblazing would be his fondness for makeup. He was known for applying eyeshadow and mascara even from an early time, 1955, 1956, when men wouldn't really have applied makeup.
No, absolutely not. And apparently he was so good at applying makeup that he used to do his girlfriend's mascara for them.
Oh, right.
And he was wearing, I think he was crossing a lot of gender stereotypes at the time. He was also wearing a lot of pink clothing at a time when that was still considered like highly feminine to be wearing pink. But,
yes.
He was wearing it, and Hal Lansky says that at the time, real men were not supposed to be wearing pink. But then Elvis came along, started wearing pink, and it soon became a 50s thing with, pink clothing, pink Cadillacs becoming all the rage. It was quite groundbreaking at the time.
I actually wonder whether, when he was wearing the pinks and things like that, whether his masculinity or his sexuality was actually ever questioned. I'm sure it was.
I'm sure it very much was in society, but I think he's somebody that was so sure of his own masculinity, so confident in it, that I don't think it fazed him at all. He could get away with it. And you see that later on when he's wearing the jumpsuits, but he's still so masculine on stage. I think there's very few men that could get away with wearing, the things that we say, the makeup, the pink shirts at the time, later on the jumpsuits, and still be such a masculine sex symbol.
He didn't shy away from sort of experimentation. I mean, the gold lame suit as well. Yes,
absolutely. The gold lame suit is fantastic. I wrote a piece a while ago for Esquire magazine saying that I feel that suit was the start of bling culture, which we know a lot about now. It's an example of how people use flashy garments to show that, I've really hit the big time. And I think, he had come from such poverty and, in a matter of years, he had managed to suddenly really, really hit the big time. And I think wearing that suit sent out a really strong message. He was, the king of bling at the time.
And then we have the movie years, because obviously his style changed again after he came out of the army.
Yeah, absolutely. The movie years, this is mostly when we are seeing him dressed on screen. So he's been dressed by people like Cy Debord and Edith Head, the costume designer. Edith said that basically with Elvis, he wore a uniform, and she wasn't going to tamper too much with the template of what it was. It was an open neck shirt, it was dark pants, it was a light jacket, dark shoes. So we see kind of variations of this throughout many of his films. I would say kind of in terms of fashion, it's perhaps not his most, because he wasn't given the creative freedom really that we saw in the 50s, where he was, totally in control of his image, choosing whatever he wanted to wear. And then in the 70s, where he was working with Bill Ballou, and it was very much a collaboration. They were both putting a lot of creative input into it. But in the 60s, when he's doing the movies, we see less of Elvis's creativity because he's mostly being dressed by the costume designers on the films.
Yes, in fact, you have some very interesting wardrobe continuity sheets photographed in the book. I thought those were quite interesting to see.
Yeah, they're really lovely, actually. I found them, there's lots of them about at auction houses. So I was actually able to get hold of quite a few of them for my book, for the research. I actually just ended up using a couple of them in the book. But I had a big
I'm just looking here now from King Creole, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're really lovely because they also have the little photos of Elvis. He's been photographed kind of backstage wearing the various outfits. So it kind of gives you a nice little kind of snippet of what was happening off screen when he was making all of these films. I had some continuity sheets, and then there's also, I managed to get hold of a nice illustration of a Edith Head outfit that she made there. Yeah, so it's quite nice to have this, this behind the scenes side.
It's quite a contrast, though, between sort of the wardrobe continuity sheets for King Creole and then the photographs for, say, something like Blue Hawaii with the pattern shirts.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Blue Hawaii, style-wise, really does stand out as something very different because it's not this template that Edith Head was talking about, which Elvis wears in a lot of his films. It's something that's, quite different with the Hawaiian print shirt. And that shirt, the Hawaiian print, the Blue Hawaii look, is something that I think men's fashion designers keep referencing. Barely a summer season goes by where you haven't got, at least a handful of the big designers bringing back Hawaiian shirts and, really tapping into that kind of Elvis Blue Hawaii look.
Yeah, we all know kind of what happened during the 60s, that the movies got very humdrum and budgety and sort of quite low budget. And then we move on to the biggie, which was the 1968 comeback special outfits.
Absolutely.
Everybody, it's represented and everybody associates the black leather suit with this TV special.
Yes, completely. It's become, completely iconic look for the whole show. I think Elvis was under a lot of pressure to show that he was still relevant. He'd spent almost a decade, kind of in Hollywood. In that time, a lot of new bands, culture had changed. I think the pressure was really on to show that he still mattered. And I think he absolutely achieved that in the show.
And some, yes.
Yeah, he just comes out all guns blazing. And I think the black leather outfit is probably fashion-wise the highlight of the whole show. I think it really empowered him as a performer, and it gave him a kind of slightly dangerous edge that he had not had since the 1950s. And I think a lot of people since then, a lot of performers have used it as a reference point. So you've had people like Bono, Robbie Williams, Lady Gaga, Britney Spears. It's a look that people kind of trot out when they want to reinvent themselves and have a bit of a rock and roll edge. But Elvis was the first to really nail that look.
Wasn't the black leather suit based on a denim sort of design?
Yeah, absolutely. Apparently, Bill Ballou, the very talented designer that he was working with at the time, traced it from a denim jacket and denim jeans, traced around it and just remade it in cardigan leather.
Yeah, I've got a note here as well, though. It could almost be a little bit fetishistic, if that's the way you pronounce it.
Yeah, that's a comment that a designer at Zoey Goto said. She said that he was very fetishistic and he was really dressing for sex appeal, and he really achieved that with the outfit. And head to toe leather, there is a bit of a fetish edge to it, it must be said.
Yeah, I mean, both you and I have seen the 68 comeback special probably quite a few times. And if you look at the way the ladies in the audience are looking at him, it's fairly obvious that it was a great success, that suit.
Yeah, just total adoration, isn't it?
We can't go any further without mentioning the white suit which he wore during the If I Can Dream sequence either, because that's such an iconic image as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think first of all, it's an example of just really beautiful tailoring. Second of all, when he was growing up, he would go and see a lot of the blues performers on Beale Street, and it's a tactic that apparently he got from them. But if you want to, be the one who's everyone's eyes are on stage, you wear white, and the lights will instantly illuminate you. So he understood the power of wearing all white clothing. Used that again throughout the 70s with his jumpsuits, and it works really well. But I also say in the book that I feel that it's kind of the white suit. It's like a symbol of upward social mobility. So he came from very humble beginnings, sharecropper father at one point. They did not have much when he was younger, but he suddenly found this amazing, fame and adoration. And it's almost like a kind of plantation owner's outfit that he's wearing. So I say kind of symbolically, that outfit very ties into the idea of the American dream, which I think Elvis kind of really epitomized.
I've got a note here as well. It says the 1968 comeback special is essentially when the 1970s starts for Elvis. So and you can almost see that with the white suit, because you just touched on it. Nearly all the early jumpsuits he wore, with a couple of exceptions. When he started in 1969, he wore some black suits. But 99% of them were white, especially in the early years on stage. And I can see your point, actually, because he would stand out from the back, the musicians and so forth, because they would normally wear dark blue or burgundy or something like that. So he was easy to pick out. But then again, you're not really going to miss Elvis Presley with or without the white suit.
Yeah, I think the 68 comeback special, there's it was just a forerunner for the pure theatre of the 70s. And you can see, looking at the outfits, looking at his performance, you can see everything that's to come at that moment.
Yeah. Now, the jumpsuits, they're a very personal thing with a lot of fans. Some people love them. Some people are just indifferent about them. I liked the ones, they were quite simple from sort of 1970 to about 1973, 74. I don't know what you think, but I think the middle ones, sort of 75, 76, got a little bit gaudy looking, for my liking anyway.
I see what you're saying, and actually I've just seen the re-released documentary Elvis, That's the Way It Is, that was shown everywhere a couple of weeks ago. And yes. I agree, some of the outfits, when they're just, very simple, it's really effective on stage. He looks fantastic. And at that stage, he's also, physically in really good health. He looks chiseled. He looks amazing on stage in these. But I personally really love the later ones. I love it when he goes all out, because I think he's just really pushing the fashion boundaries, and he's at the really extreme end of fashion, which I think is kind of the most interesting end. So the more decorated, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh yeah, no, that's fair enough. I just like to tell everybody, my favorite jumpsuit, or one of my favorite jumpsuits, is the Peacock jumpsuit.
Yes, yeah, that's a Graceland, isn't it?
Yeah, and then probably one of my least favorite ones is what's known as the gypsy one. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It looked quite heavy. It almost looked like a suit of armor in places. So I've never really been keen on the gypsy one, but I really, really do like the peacock one.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. I mean, throughout my book, a lot of the people that I interview use that phrase. You know, Elvis was such a peacock. So I think to have him literally in the peacock jumpsuit, it's very fitting.
What about his offstage outfits during the 70s, Superfly and so forth? He was a real trendsetter there as well, wasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's kind of offstage, it's like a kind of slightly watered down version of what he was wearing on stage. But really, there's not a huge amount of difference. And I think it kind of tells us about how on stage and off stage, the kind of barrier between them had dissolved for Elvis. So on stage, he might be wearing a jumpsuit with a fantastic cape. And then off stage, he's wearing a kind of, you know, slightly toned down version. He's wearing a jacket with a capelet on it. And I think it's quite interesting because his offstage outfit, I think throughout his life, his offstage outfits have been as interesting as his onstage.
He did blur the lines for a short while in 1970.
And you can see that a lot in the 70s as well.
He blurred the lines a little bit in about 1972 because he went through a stage where he was wearing two-piece outfits in Vegas. He was wearing the slacks, and then he was wearing a shirt and a jacket. And again, he looked fabulous, absolutely fabulous in those.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think those two pieces kind of slowly morphed into the jumpsuits. I think it was kind of also influenced by the karate outfits that he was wearing as well. I think you can see all these different influences that kind of fed into like his final jumpsuit look.
I don't think I've ever seen anything Elvis wearing anything really, really bad that I've seen and thought, oh, what is he doing wearing that?
I don't think I have either. I think
something that strikes me is when he's doing the rehearsals for That's the Way It Is, when he's doing the rehearsals for Las Vegas, which is filmed for That's the Way It Is, he's wearing those very bright shirts.
Yeah, they're kind of quite psychedelic, aren't they?
Yeah, and I often think, you know, only Elvis could wear something like that. If I wore something like that, I'd end up looking like a big girl's blouse or something like that. Yeah.
I think it's the same with the jumpsuits. I mean, I can think of literally no other man that could wear a jumpsuit and still be considered, you know, so sexy to women, really. I think he's probably the only person who could pull that look off. I would say the only thing, and this is very minor, that I can think of that maybe didn't particularly suit Elvis was when he got a fringe in the early 70s. He had a kind of little fringe. I noticed it the other day when I was watching Elvis, That's the Way It Is. When he slicks his hair down across his forehead, I think it suits him. You can see his face better when the quiff always suits him, really.
That brings us on actually to his crowning glory, doesn't it? His hair, because that was another very stylish part of Elvis. He's actually the face of American Crew hair care products, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. Yeah, I think they put him on the tins a couple of years ago. I think Elvis's hair, particularly Elvis's hair when he was a young man in the 50s, must have been very shocking if, you know, his contemporaries had the short back and sides, and then Elvis walks in, he's got a sky-high quiff, he's got a duck's tail at the back, he's got trucker sideburns. It was,
that's a story that Red West tells us about. Some of the his classmates was going to cut his hair. Red comes in. It's in the men's room, I believe, and Red comes in and saves him. So that, you know, it must have been quite a stigma for his hair, you know, and he was obviously bullied over it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to do anything that makes you really stand out as a teenager, it's a tricky decade in everyone's life. But to do all of these things that really put you on the line, basically, and really make you stand out from your contemporaries. I think it's very brave, really. And I think that hairstyle that he had when he was younger, you can still see that it is still inspiring a new generation. And at the time, the Teddy Boys in the UK completely took it and ran with it. And then you can see there's lots of performers. Harry Styles, for example, is totally channeling Elvis, particularly with his hair. And then you have people like Bruno Mars, Rihanna's also done the quiff. So it's Elvis's rockabilly hair has, had a huge influence and still does now.
Yeah. There's also a section in the book dedicated to Elvis food.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of loved writing this because I'm really obsessed with Southern food. I absolutely love it. Any chance to go to America and kind of eat proper traditional Southern food, I'm there. And that's something Elvis always stuck to his Southern roots with his diet, particularly. When they were in Hollywood, he could have been out every night at fancy restaurants, schmoozing with the other actors in Hollywood, but he wasn't. He was generally, having Southern food, home-cooked food, black-eyed peas, fried okra, meatloaf, burgers, barbecue ribs, which are my personal favourite. He stayed very true to his roots with. It
was probably the connection back to Gladys, because Gladys would have prepared a lot of that sort of food.
Absolutely, yeah. And if that's what you've grown up eating, and it is a real comfort food, Southern food. There's something kind of just really reassuring about eating good home-cooked Southern food. So I can totally see why he kept to it. And when I was researching that section, I also spent a lot of time in the arcade restaurant in Memphis, which is amazing, having lots of peanut butter and banana sandwiches, and the Elvis booth, which was at the back. That was his special booth because if the fans got a bit over enthusiastic, he could dart out the back door, which is just behind the booth. And it's a really, really lovely space. It's been used in a lot of films as a background location because it's that kind of pure 50s Americana. It's beautiful.
Can we also mention Elvis's cars? We all know that Elvis was big into cars, and he that was Elvis style as well. Elvis would drive a certain style of car.
Yeah, and he just brought so many of them throughout his lifetime. That was a really funny thing when I was researching the book. It was so easy to find images of Elvis's cars because they're just constantly coming up at auction. Any car that Elvis has bought, and I think there were 200 odd of them that he bought throughout his lifetime. So they're kind of constantly in rotation at auction houses. There are loads of them. And I really loved reading the stories about this whole kind of performance that Elvis would do when he went to buy a car. So he'd go down there and he'd have the Memphis Mafia with him, and then the local media would turn up and, they'd film him. It would be this whole performance of the cameras, and then they'd stay behind the media and they would interview the salesperson after Elvis left. And I just love it. It's like, just the kind of theatrical side of this car buying that he did. And I think he just really loved cars, and he loved having them customized, and I think that was a real creative outlet for him. And he worked with the fantastic George Barris, who also made the Batmobile. And they did, some wild cars together. One of them was a limo that was painted with crushed diamonds, and it cost $65,000 at the time. And I think it was a kind of creative outlet and a hobby for him. And I was lucky enough, sadly George has passed away now, but I was lucky enough to interview him for my book and get some thoughts there, which was really lovely. And there was also a strange story that I found about a Cadillac. Elvis was too busy and not leaving America. So the Colonel decided that Elvis's Cadillac was going to tour around Australia. It's a really bizarre story in his place. And thousands of people turned up around Australia to come and see Elvis's Cadillac. which toured around the country. So yeah, that kind of shows like how strong the association between Elvis and his cars was.
I think I remember seeing the news report on that in the movie This Is Elvis. The reporter says it's got a phone and it's got a record player and everything like that. Fit for a king. He not only loved buying cars, but he also loved giving them away as well. I always remember the story where the news reporter is reporting on Elvis's latest buying spree, and then at the end he looks into the camera and says, "Elvis, if you're watching, I'd love a new Cadillac." And of course, the very next day, Elvis bought the reporter a new Cadillac.
I think it's fantastic. I bet a lot of reporters were saying that again after that.
That's right. Can we talk a little bit about Elvis's homes and what you've called Elvis's architecture?
Yeah. I've been there a few times. I've just been back to Tupelo in January for Elvis's birthday, which was a really fantastic trip. We did Tupelo and Memphis, and we were at Graceland for their birthday ceremony on the 8th of January, which is also my birthday, as luck would have it.
Right. Great. What a coincidence.
It was fantastic. So Priscilla was there and gave a speech. And yeah, it was my 40th birthday on Elvis's birthday. So that was a very nice link. But we got to, go and visit the shotgun shack that he was born in Tupelo, which I'm sure many of the listeners have already visited, but if you haven't, it's a fantastic place because it just shows his very, very humble upbringing, and then you can drive in such a short amount of time and suddenly you're at Graceland, which is
that's right.
Totally fantastic.
I think we drove from Memphis to Tupelo in about an hour when we visited. I think it's about an hour.
Absolutely. I mean, in distance, there's not much, but they are, from where he was born to where he ended up, it's worlds apart, really.
Well, the contrast is amazing. I think you could fit the whole house in Tupelo in the kitchen at Graceland, I believe. Somebody told me. I think somebody told me that once.
I'm sure you can, which just kind of puts it all into context. And then the stepping stone house that he had was the apartment at Lauderdale Courts, now Uptown Square Apartments, which this is my number one tip for Elvis fans. If you are going to Memphis, you can stay overnight in it, and you have to book it through their Facebook page. I think it's around about $250, $300 a night, but it is the best money we have ever spent because
I can imagine.
It's just the most fantastic place to stay. So we've stayed there a couple of times now. And I mean, it doesn't get much better than waking up in Elvis's teenage bedroom, really. And
that's for sure.
And you can have a bath in his bathroom, or you could sleep in his parents' bedroom next door. And it's really lovely. And they have redecorated it in a kind of very sympathetic to the late 40s, early 50s style. So it's inside, it's quite beautiful. I'd say it's a once in a lifetime place to stay.
Did you visit the honeymoon hideaway, the 1350 Ladera Circle is it Palm Springs? Yeah,
absolutely. I've been there a couple of times. And it's really, really fantastic. I think it's just an example of just really, really beautiful mid-century modern design. And I think kind of design people, there can be quite a lot of snobbery, I think, around Elvis. And, people maybe would walk into Graceland, that wouldn't be, I love Graceland, but that maybe wouldn't be their style. It wouldn't be seen as, kind of high design, the kind of thing that you would see in architectural magazines. But walk into his Palm Springs honeymoon hideaway, and it blows you away. Kind of design-wise, it's just fantastic. Nobody could look at that and think, that's not really my style. It's just a really beautiful piece of architecture. So I think they spent about a year renting that place, and that's where him and Priscilla and some of the entourage was there for the honeymoon.
Yeah, there's a very famous 8mm home movie of them sat in front of what they call the peanut brittle stone wall.
Yes, and it's
And
got that lovely...
there's a picture of that in your book.
Yes, absolutely. And it's got the lovely sunken sofa, which is just vast. I mean, you could fit, 50-odd people onto it. But yeah, it's really beautiful. And you can, if you're visiting Palm Springs, you can book. They do twice daily, I think, tours. So you can book, and they kind of give you free reign. It's the house, really. You can just wander around it. It's really, really fantastic.
But I don't think you can stay overnight, unfortunately, not like Lauderdale Court.
No. I think it's just the daily tours. It was a while ago. It was up for sale again. So I wonder if at some point it will end up in private hands again. But for the time being, you can still do the tours.
The Hillcrest house is up for sale at the moment, I believe, as well. I think is it 30 million or something?
I don't quite have enough.
No. What we should do, all us fans should get together and chip in, and we could raise the 30 million. And then
like an Elvis timeshare.
Yeah, and then we could all spend a few days there per year.
I would so be up for that.
or open it up for tours.
Yeah. But I do think out of all the houses that he lived in, you can't beat Graceland. I think it's such a fantastic place. My all-time favourite room at Graceland is the Jungle Room, because I think it's just so creative. I love the idea of themed rooms anyway. I'd like to start that in my own house. But I love that he's, it's so creative. It's like walking into a film set. And it also reminds me of, I went to a hotel a while ago called the Madonna Inn, which is this like super kitschy 1950s motel, and every room inside they've done with a different theme. So they have the Hills of Ireland as one of the themes, or the Caveman room, which is the one that we stayed in. It's totally bonkers, but really, really fun, and the design is great. And I went there. I don't believe that Elvis ever stayed there, but it really reminded me of the Jungle Room, and I just love that. Yeah, that kind of creativity and not taking things too seriously. And if I ever have a bigger house, I would love to have a Jungle Room of my own.
Did you hear how the Jungle Room furniture came about? Apparently, Vernon came back from shopping, and he said to Elvis, "I've just seen the ugliest furniture you could ever imagine." And so Elvis said, "Okay, show me." And he went down and he bought the lot.
I love that.
Now, I don't know whether he bought it because he liked it or whether he did it just to sort of upset Vernon a little bit,
Yeah, I think he must have grown to love it because it stayed there.
It's like a time capsule now when you walk into Graceland.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's a really, really fantastic place. I've been to Graceland many times. First time I went to Graceland was 20 years ago when I was writing my dissertation on Graceland and the interiors, and I've been back regularly ever since, and still has the same effect on me. It's just a very, very powerful place, and it's just so, Elvis is just there in every nook and cranny.
Yes.
And yeah, I think, it's the closest.
I know some fans say it's smaller than they anticipated, but what they've got to remember, now it's a modest residence, but in 1957 it was a mansion. It was huge. People didn't have houses like that. Well, ordinary people didn't have houses like that in 1957. So it was a mansion. But in today's standards, it's modest. However, you'll never get over the fact that it's who owned it now is the importance of it. The fact that it belonged to Elvis, and it was his primary residence. For all the other houses he had, Graceland was always the place. Of course, he bought it for his mother and father, so it'll always have a special place in his heart anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you're right. I think it's the one place where, it's just so much Elvis's identity is there. And I think also we're now so used to, our stars having these kind of mega MTV cribs houses with kind of the West Wing and yeah, I think at the time it was probably a pretty fantastic house to live in. And Elvis did some great renovations to it and added a lot to it. So yeah, I think it was probably a beautiful place for him to live at the time.
What would you say is Elvis's legacy on the fashion and style of today?
I think there are so many kind of areas of style that he has influenced. I'd say the 70s has probably had the most influence on performers and pop stars now. He really opened the door for this kind of total flamboyance in performers, especially with men. But I would say probably on a kind of mainstream level, it was the rockabilly era that you can see it everywhere. Now people using reference of it, the quiff, the jeans and the jacket. It's rehashed and reinvented, practically every single year there's a different version of it. And you can see a lot of our contemporary pop stars and celebrities, tap into the look. People like Harry Styles, he's total 50s Elvis rockabilly. He's definitely borrowing from Elvis's look. So that's the one that I think kind of mainstream rockabilly is the one that I think is Elvis's fashion legacy, really.
He influenced so many people when he was alive, and he still influences them today. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. He really has.
I'd like to mention your second book, entitled Vintage Style Inside the Dapper World of Retro Enthusiasts. Now, that was only published, a couple of months ago? June, I believe.
Yeah, it was. Over the summer it came out. And there's a lot of Elvis fans in there, actually. A lot of people who I met through the book. So one of them is a lovely young woman called Sayaka, who lives in Sicily. And she is a Elvis tribute artist. Okay. She has a blog called Hungry Caramella. And yeah, she's this amazing half Japanese, half Italian young woman who sings like Elvis. She's really fantastic. So I went out there and we kind of bonded over. She liked my book and she reviewed my book, so we kind of got to know each other through the Elvis book. So I went out, and she was one of the first people that I photographed for the book. So I photographed her with all of her Elvis memorabilia around her. And then it's other people from, I photographed quite a few people in Palm Springs who are really into the mid-century modern style, and people from all eras. It kind of it spans over 100 years of styles and takes us, right up until the 1990s. And with all of them, I interview them and I'm talking to them about their style and where they get their clothing from. And I think the main thing that I wanted to know from all of them is, why are you dressing out of step with modern society? I think that's really interesting. Why do you not look like everyone else? Why are you choosing to do this? And generally, the people kind of had a real passion for the vintage era that they were specifically into. So I did that book, and that came out over the summer. And my next book, I'm hoping, will be on the lovely Dolly Parton. I think she deserves the book.
Oh, right. And have you got in touch with Dolly yet?
I haven't, no. I'm hoping to go over to Tennessee. Well, we'll have to see how things are. It's a bit up in the air at the moment, but hopefully at Easter, and kind of get the ball rolling there with her. Right. So I'm doing that, and I'm also trying to get together a exhibition on Elvis style. So
I was going to ask you if you've had anything else in the pipeline to do with Elvis.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Elvis lends himself very well to a style exhibition. So I'm talking with a gallery at the moment about doing that, and also about putting a documentary about Elvis and his style together. So fingers crossed, that's kind of all in the pipeline. But if there's any listeners that have any Elvis-owned garments that they think would be of interest for an exhibition or documentary, it would be really great to hear from them. My email address is on my website, which is ZoeyGoto.com. So please get in touch, and I'd love to hear from Elvis fans anyway.
Yeah, or they can get in touch with me at Elvis the Ultimate Fan Channel at gmail.com, and I'll obviously pass them along to you.
Perfect. That would be really great. Yeah, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
All your books are available fairly widespread, like Amazon and so forth,
yes.
Are they?
They are, yes, absolutely. They are. In America, the main places are Amazon and Target. In the UK, it's Waterstones, Blackwell's, Amazon, and then kind of internationally, it's on all of the Amazon. So yeah, it's really widely available.
That's very, very good. I found it very, very interesting. I learned a couple of things. I didn't think I'd learn. I didn't think I'd learn as much as I did.
Thank you. It's really nice to talk to you.
And I'm sure my listeners enjoyed listening to you as well. Thanks very much, Zoe, and take care.
Thanks, Steve. Bye then.
Thanks once again to Zoe for joining me on this podcast today. Don't forget to check out her best-selling book, Elvis Style, From Zoot Suits to Jumpsuits. You can contact me by email at elvistheultimatefanchannel@gmail.com. You can also contact me on Facebook and Twitter. You can hear all my podcasts on all good podcast providers such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, Google Podcasts, and iHeartRadio, to name just a few. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join me next time for another episode from Elvis the Ultimate Fan Channel podcast.